Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar presented by Arctic Wolf Labs. Today, Stephen Campbell and I will discuss Lorenz Ransomware Intrusion. If you have any question during this LinkedIn Live, please type them into the comment box in your LinkedIn and we will bring them up end of the presentation. This is a 30-minute session and this will be recorded. My name is Shule Tatar. I am the product marketing manager here at Arctic Wolf. A little bit about myself. Previously, I worked for vulnerability management company, backup and disaster recovery, as well as Salesforce. I hold a bachelor degree in computer science and an MBA. Also, we have today Stephen Campbell, who is threat intelligence researcher at Arctic Wolf Labs. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Good afternoon, y'all. So I'm excited to be here, but I'll try to keep this portion a little bit short and sweet. So, as she said, I've been a threat intelligence researcher here at Arctic Wolf for almost a year, coming up on that 1 year anniversary in October. I've had around 8 years in the intelligence field. Prior to joining here, I was a CTI analyst at EY. During my time there, I monitored the threat landscape for multiple organizations in a variety of sectors. Had a heavy focus like on malicious infrastructure, such as like IP addresses and typo domains. Now, prior to that, I was at the NSA where I monitored threat actors and activity associated with weapons and counterproliferation in the Middle East. Throughout my career, I've authored a multitude of strategic and tactical intelligence reports. And I think with that's enough about me. I'll hand it back over to you, Shule.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephen. So with that, let's start diving in. Arctic Wolf is global leader in security operations, delivering a premium cloud-native security operations platform designed to end cyber risk. Leveraging your existing technology stack to gain broader visibility across your attack surface, endpoint, network, cloud, identity, and human. We send all these telemetries into our platform, which is built in an open XDR architecture, solving the biggest challenge organizations are facing in cybersecurity: collecting, storing, and analyzing security data across attack surface in real time. As data streams through via our sensors, scanners, and agent and third-party integration, we enrich it with threat intelligence with Arctic Wolf Labs. We use both human and automations to respond decisive to the threat and attacks. We have our triage team, a 24/7 team to security experts who are investigating the alerts generated by Arctic Wolf platform. And we have a solutions on top of this platform, which are delivered by cloud environment and delivered by concierge delivery model. This is an approach where we look at your environment and then tailor our services according to your business needs. And we pair you with a team of security experts who are not only monitoring your data, but also learning your organization's unique requirements and eventually optimize and maximize the effectiveness of your environment. Arctic Wolf announced Arctic Wolf Labs back in May 2022. It brings Arctic Wolf's elite security researchers, such as Steven, data scientists, and security development engineers together to collaboratively work on an Arctic Wolf's core mission, which is ending cyber risk. Arctic Wolf Labs is responsible for delivering cutting-edge threats research on new and emerging adversaries, developing advanced threat detection models with machine learning as well as AI, and driving continuous improvements in the speed, scale, and detection effectiveness on the Arctic Wolf solution offerings. With the deep domain knowledge, Arctic Wolf Labs bring the world-class security innovations not only to Arctic Wolf customer base, but also security community at large. Last week, we announced that VX Intel, which is a leader providing of threat and malware intelligence, has joined Arctic Wolf. The VX Intel team became part of Arctic Wolf Labs. VX Intel currently analyzes over 500,000 files every single day and over 10 terabytes of data each month. And it comes from over 100 global data sources. This acquisition of VX Intel basically brings the world class and unique threat intelligence data set, which enables Arctic Wolf Labs to have unmatched malware and threat intelligence data. With that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to Steven, and he will share with us technical analysis and recommendations regarding Lorenz Ransomware Intrusion. So, Steven, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Shule. So I'm going to jump right into this. So first off, I kind of want to give like an overview of the Lorenz Ransomware Group. They've been active since at least February 2021 and have gone through multiple iterations prior to becoming the Lorenz Ransomware Group. Based on other security research and mentions on their leak site, Lorenz was rebranded from the SZ40 ransomware group. It's also noteworthy to call out the Lorenz encryptor itself was the same one used by a previous ransomware group or operation known as Thundercrypt. So I'd say really it's safe to say that the Lorenz ransomware operators have been in the extortion business for quite some time, which goes right into the second bullet here. Um, the group employs a high degree of operational security throughout their intrusions. We've observed the group compromise assets outside of an organization to then use them in intrusions against other victims. They also like to tunnel their activity through proxies, which helps masquerade their activity. They clear logs to hinder our ability as analysts to identify malicious activity, and they use a lot of living off the land techniques to evade detections. Now, Lorenz conducts double extortion, where they exfiltrate data before encrypting, and then this is to really increase the likelihood of a victim actually paying the ransom. Organizations with a solid backup process will likely be able to fully recover if the data was only encrypted, but stealing that data beforehand makes it a lot more difficult for organizations to outright not pay that ransom. Now, the group relies on two methods to encrypt data. Recently, the group leveraged Microsoft's BitLocker drive encryption to encrypt the majority of endpoints, but we have seen some ransom files on ESXi hosts that have the .lorenz extension. Based on our telemetry and the data leak site, Lorenz has primarily targeted small and medium-sized businesses located in the United States, at least over the past quarter. However, we have seen some outliers in Mexico and China. All right, so I'm going to kind of jump over into the diamond model for just a second and point out a few things I think is interesting about this group. In this specific campaign, the initial access vector is relatively unique. Prior to the exploitation of the Mitel device, the group primarily obtained initial access via spear phishing. Now, with this specific CVE, there's a couple takeaways here. Either Lorenz had exclusive access to an exploit for the CVE, or an initial access broker has exclusive access to the exploit. Sadly, we don't have the telemetry to know for sure. What we do know is the exploitation of this CVE led to a successful Lorenz ransomware intrusion. There's one other point I want to talk about before moving on to the next slide. If you take a look at the infrastructure section, you'll notice that Lorenz has used DigitalOcean infrastructure. And I mean, if we're being honest, it really isn't that surprising, as many threat groups tend to host infrastructure with DigitalOcean. But what is interesting is the affinity to the BL networks over multiple intrusions, which is something you don't see as often. Now, this might be the group compromising individual home routers to then use in intrusions, because we have seen a couple IP addresses linked to ASUS home routers used by this group. Now, I think one thing we want to keep in mind is that this group employs a high degree of OPSEC and attempts to really get away from the intrusion as far as possible. So get as many hops away. So that might be a reason we're seeing that too. All right, so moving on to the next slide. Now that we've covered an overview of Lorenz, I want to really talk about the intrusion we recently investigated. So to start, Lorenz obtained initial access by exploiting a Mitel VoIP device that was sitting on the network perimeter. Now, if we do a quick Shodan query, we can come up with around 20,000 Mitel devices exposed to the internet. So a relatively enticing target to threat actors. In this intrusion, the threat actors exploited CVE 2022-29499, which is a remote code execution vulnerability due to incorrect data validation for a diagnostic script. I'd like to note here that what we observed in the intrusion, at least the initial access portion, was nearly identical to a suspected ransomware intrusion reported by CrowdStrike back in June 2022, with slight variations in file names. Now, I put the GET request and a few other commands at the bottom of the slides in the hopes that, when I'm talking through this, it doesn't get too confusing, because it did require 2 GET requests here. And the first one populates the GET URL parameter of the vtest.php file with a URL to a local file. Now, this GET request was needed for the second GET request to work and obtain remote code execution on the device. Now, because the second request originated from the local host because of that first GET request and included command injection, it allowed the device to reach out to the threat actor's infrastructure. Now, after successful exploitation, the threat actors downloaded a shell script called wc2_deploy. So really, what did that script do? Well, it established an SSL encrypted reverse shell using living off the land techniques via the make FIFO command and OpenSSL. Now, based on the packet capture, we were able to ascertain that the established reverse shell was an NCAT SSL listener. Now, after the reverse shell was established, the threat actors made use of the Mitel device's command line interface to create a directory called core dump in the temp directory, and then subsequently downloaded the open source TCP tunneling tool Chisel directly from GitHub via wget. The threat actors renamed the Chisel binary to mem, they unzipped it, and then executed it to establish a connection back to the threat actor's Chisel server. It's notable that they skipped TLS certificate verification, pretty much allowing the Chisel client to accept any certificate that was presented to it. Now, after doing all that, we didn't see any activity for nearly a month. We're not really sure why the threat actors dwelled on the access for that long, but there is at least a few plausible reasons. Dwell time could have been increased due to an initial access broker trying to offload the access to the Lorenz ransomware group, or at least based on the recent targeting of small to medium-sized businesses, the actors could have been waiting it out in hopes that, hey, the log retention would not be more than a month. Considering the exploit is tightly held and we've only observed one threat group, Lorenz, use it, it's possible that they did not want to burn it before using it as much as possible. Conducting follow-on activity after logs have been rolled would be one way to save that initial access exploit. Of course, knowing why a threat actor did something can sometimes be, I would say, nearly impossible to assess. But now, once they returned to the Mitel device, we observed Lorenz interact with a web shell named PDF import export. Now, here we have medium confidence that this was placed on the device around the time of the initial exploitation, as we didn't see it being dropped during the renewed access timeframe. After interacting with that web shell, Lorenz reestablished the reverse shell and the Chisel tunnel in the same manner as they did a month prior, but to different infrastructure this time. And from there, they used Chisel's SOX functionality to pivot into the environment. Now, once in the environment, the threat actors relied heavily on the usage of crack map exec. Now, crack map exec was first used to dump credentials remotely, leveraging the LSASI module, which creates a full LSAS memory dump. We also observed them use out mini dump, which abuses Windows error reporting to dump LSAS memory as well. And that was happening almost right after the LSASI activity. This is likely where the threat actors obtained privileged credentials. We know that threat actors had at least access to 2 privileged accounts during the intrusion, one with local admin privileges and then one with domain admin privileges. And these were used to move laterally through the environment via RDP and then subsequently to a domain controller. After dumping those credentials, the threat actors began network and domain enumeration activity using your typical enumeration commands like netsh to display firewall status, ipconfig to see all the adapters, and netstat to see all the active TCP connections. We also observed the threat actors leveraging certutil to identify the Active Directory certificate authorities registered within the forest. One interesting thing was the use of the find string command. They used the command to recursively search through compromised device directories for passwords and running instances of PowerShell. Now, after domain enumeration and moving laterally to a domain controller, threat actors use the compromised accounts to install FileZilla on multiple devices. We observed the threat actors leveraging FileZilla to exfiltrate the victim's data to 5 different IP addresses via SSH. Now, after data exfil, we start seeing the threat actors prep for data encryption. Lorenz leveraged PowerShell to get the contents of a file named worm.txt and execute it. Now, the worm.txt file essentially enumerated Active Directory, returning a list of all the domain computers, and then created a scheduled task named network, which retrieved the PowerShell script security_watermark.jpg, and then ran it on those systems. Now, the security_watermark JPEG was ran sequentially on multiple systems and is what really started the encryption process. The first portion of that file added multiple keys to the registry via the registry add command to prepare the devices for BitLocker encryption. And a lot of those keys are what you'd see when you're trying to set up BitLocker on your device. However, the recovery key message, which would be displayed on the pre-boot key recovery screen after the device was encrypted, contained the unique URL used to conduct negotiations between the threat actor and the victim. Now, next, the script would attempt to install BitLocker, including all role services and applicable management tools, and then enable BitLocker to encrypt the devices. Now, the threat actors kept track of the encryption process by sending an HTTP post request to one of the IP addresses used for data exfiltration. And although Lorenz primarily leveraged BitLocker for encryption, we did observe a select few ESXi hosts with Lorenz ransomware. Now, once encryption was complete, the script cleared all event logs in an attempt to hinder intrusion analysis. Although the script was really efficient in encrypting the devices, the threat actors made a major mistake. The password used for the BitLocker encryption was actually in plain text, which allowed the victim to decrypt nearly 95% of their devices. Now, that pretty much wraps up the key points within this intrusion, but I want to leave you with some actual recommendations you can use to secure your environment against this threat and similar intrusions. First off, of course, would be to upgrade your Mitel devices to MiVoice Connect version R19.3. This upgrade will fully remediate the CVE used to obtain initial access in this intrusion.
Yeah,
Now,
patch your vulnerabilities, people.
yes. Now, if you're not able to patch, you can upgrade to the latest version, or if you're not able to upgrade to the latest version, Mitel did provide a script back in April for releases 19.2, SP3 and earlier, and then R14 as well, that provides at least a solution for it. Kind of what like Shule was talking about, timely patching is important, not only for your critical assets, but really all devices, especially devices that are on the network perimeter, as these are easily found via internet searches such as like Shodan. Now with that, you can't really harden or secure what you do not know about or you don't see. So scanning for external appliances and web applications should be an integral part in assessing your organization's footprint and attack surface. Now, external scans can also help your organization better understand like what your attack surface looks like to a threat actor and where your patching efforts should be focused. And out of those external scans, you should be able to identify critical assets that may be exposed. Now, if a device does not need to be on the network perimeter, remove it. That'll help reduce your organization's attack surface. If the device is essential on the perimeter, ensure that it's continuously monitored to detect potentially malicious traffic. Now, monitoring just critical assets is not enough in the current threat landscape. Organizations need to monitor all externally facing assets, including like your VoIP devices and IoT devices. Without monitoring of these assets, we're really enabling threat actors to gain a foothold into environments without being detected. Now, on configuring PowerShell logging, our team has been investigating intrusions where PowerShell is being used extensively throughout for quite some time. Configuring PowerShell logging can really greatly increase your ability to analyze an intrusion and identify malicious activity as well. So, for example, like if you enable script block logging, it allows you to record the contents of all the script blocks that are processed by PowerShell. Module logging and transcription logging are also beneficial to really understand the PowerShell usage within your environment. Without PowerShell logging enabled in this intrusion, the victim would not have been able to grab the plaintext password and decrypt the 95% of devices encrypted with BitLocker. Now, logging is essential for any organization, but if it's stored locally, it increases the likelihood that a threat actor can access the logs to either gain valuable information about the organization's network, or they could potentially manipulate it, where that's kind of what we've seen in this intrusion, where they were clearing event logs. So storing those logs externally to your organization will help prevent manipulation and allow for detailed analysis if needed later on. And just like logging is essential, so is creating backups of all critical data and assets. It's not enough to just create backups, but we also need to be testing them to ensure the data can be recoverable. You should consider creating golden images of critical assets so that in the case of rebuilding, it becomes easier, at least limiting downtime for your organization, which of course can be costly. And then finally, leverage publicly available network and endpoint detections to identify malicious activity. I think open source rules are a great way for organizations with a limited budget to protect themselves. Arctic Wolf Labs has created a custom Suricata rule that can aid in the detection. And then also we created a custom YAR rule that can help as well. And I think with that, I'll wrap it up on my end. I hope y'all have learned a thing or three maybe. Shule, I'll pass it back over to you to see if we have any questions I might be able to answer.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was really insightful. I really appreciate your time. But before we get into the questions, what I would like to do is I would like to thank you, Marcus Nies, Ross Phillips, Teresa Whitemore, Alex Amor, and rest of the Arctic Wolf Labs team. You guys did a really fantastic job here, and thank you.
Thank you. Our team put in a lot of work on this, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, perfect. So let's look at the questions. There is one question that I would like to go ahead and ask. What is the difference between double and triple extortion?
Okay, so many things. Double extortion really, I think, took off around 2020, and it's really where a threat actor will exfiltrate data prior to encrypting. And really, the goal here is to provide another avenue to monetize their ransom efforts. Not only does the victim have to worry about the data being encrypted, they also have to worry about their data being stolen and potentially leaked to the public or sold to the highest bidder. In double extortion, you'll typically see a ransomware group try to name and shame the victim by posting them to their leak site, typically after negotiations falter, really trying to pressure victims into paying that ransom. This can sometimes up the pressure on the victim due to like privacy regulations and data breach laws that really have severe consequences for an organization. Now, with triple extortion, the threat actors are building on that to put even more pressure on an organization. Um, while a victim is trying to rebuild their systems or respond to the ransomware intrusion, some groups will conduct DDoS attacks against like the victims' public websites. And as we know, like downtime is important to all organizations and can be really, really costly. This really just adds another tool to the threat actors' toolbox when it comes to ransomware negotiations. And you didn't ask about it, but like in some cases, we've even seen quadruple extortion, which is where threat actors add harassment to their bag of tricks. Really, this is where they'll email or call customers. They'll do business partners, employees, or even media, really, to tell them, "Hey, this victim was compromised," which exerts even more pressure on the victim to resolve the ransomware attack by paying, essentially paying the ransomware actors.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was really insightful. I didn't know about the last part, so that's good. So there is one question regarding to CVE 2022-29499. Is it still a zero-day vulnerability? I guess not. They released the patch, but chime in.
Yeah, so the short answer is no. I would say a 0 day is considered a vulnerability that's been disclosed but has not been patched. And now, one thing to note is this was a 0 day vulnerability back in March, when the CrowdStrike reporting, or at least when they seen their intrusion. But the CVE has been completely remediated in the MiVoice Connect 19.3 release, which was back in June. And then that script was published back in April, I believe. So technically, the vulnerability was no longer a 0 day back in April when Mitel published that solution script along with their initial security advisory.
Awesome. There is another one. I think that will be the last question that we can address due to the, we have a hard stop. Does Arctic Wolf have detection in place for this kind of ransomware attack?
Yeah, our customers are protected. We have multiple detections in place for Lorenz related TTPs, as well as like other ransomware groups, right? We have those on the endpoint and on the network where our sensors at least have visibility into that into attack traffic. With that, since timing is kind of a consideration, I think that's a short and sweet answer for that question.
All right. Those are all the questions that we can take at this point. We can follow up with the remaining of the questions that we might have. Thank you again, Stephen, for taking your time and sharing your expertise. And thank you all for joining, and we will see you next time.
Thank you all.